we go. This is class 4. The first thing I want to do is let everybody know that when you collected your inserts today, I had replaced class 3 with some of the corrections that needed to be made. An eternal problem in word processing software, especially here in the West, is that it understands alphabets that go left to right, but not so much alphabets that go right to left. And so sometimes when you paste a word in Hebrew into a page, depending upon the word processor, it'll either reverse the letters in the word, or it'll get the letters in the word correct, but it'll reverse the word order of the sentence. And sometimes I catch those, and sometimes they slip by. So if you spot an error like that, let me know. But where such existed in lesson 3 have been corrected. And if you're watching this online, the PDF, which has got these lessons in it, has been corrected. So the lesson 3 should be okay now. All right, lesson 4, class 4. I'm going to spend today just on Hebrew. Now, I want to re-emphasize the point that this class isn't how to learn Hebrew. It includes that to a degree, but it's really much more about learning to read Scripture more deeply, starting with Genesis. And there are things in Scripture which do not always make it over into English or whatever language the translation is in, including relations between people and words, the meanings of words when you translate from one language to another. In the initial language, there will be a cluster of maybe 5 or 6 meanings surrounding a word. And when you choose a word in English, there will be a cluster of meanings, maybe 5 or 6, sometimes more, around that word. And very rarely are these 5 the same. Generally, they're quite different. And so when you read a word in English, you might think that some of the implications of it are these others that surround the chosen word, the other definitions. But really the implications are the ones that surround the word in Hebrew. Does that make sense to everybody? So part of the reason that we're looking into the Hebrew and learning a little bit of it is to understand what the meanings are surrounding a given word in the Hebrew, so that when we read the English, we don't have just one definition and we don't have implications of other definitions that aren't there in the original language. That's a part of it. Also, Hebrew has certain kinds of poetic and other structural characteristics which are not there in English, and we're going to discover those as we go along. We've seen some already. So there will be quite a number of things, and in fact, that structural issue, when we get to Genesis 22, you will discover is of profound importance. And we'll look both at the normal text of Genesis 22 as we read that story. This is called the Akedah in Hebrew. But then we'll look at its structure in Hebrew, and you'll discover there's something about the way it's laid out which is very intentional, which draws the focus to a certain point, and we'll discover what that point is. That's not there in the English. But today, I just want to spend a little bit of time reviewing some elements of Hebrew. We'll learn a couple new letters, and that'll be the content of the day. And then I will also show you a Torah scroll. You'll be able to come up and look at it up close. So, if you remember, and in fact, if you look just at the soffit up above me, I've got the Hebrew alphabet laid out in the font that we've been using. And this is what would be called a sans serif font. It doesn't have fancy little feet or tops. And it's a pretty common font used in Israel. You'll also notice that some of the characters have got red asterisk down to the left of them. And that means that that particular letter is Sophit. That means it's the version of the letter which is used at the end of a word. We did that with Shem, if you remember, the word for name in Hebrew, that this letter here Mem is what the character looks like when it's at the beginning or in the middle of a word, but at the very end of a word, it looks like that as a final character. So feet means a final letter. Someone came in and said, why do you have a sign up there that tells us that that's a soffit that these are mounted on? You see the sign over there. It's just coincidence. So feet is how that's pronounced, and that means that that's the shape of a character when it's the final character in an alphabet. However, I want to show you a couple of other alphabets, and they're in your book on page 17. The first two are pretty typical versions of Hebrew in print. The first one is completely sans serif. The second one has got a small amount of serif on it, a small amount of curliness for feet and tops. But if you look at a Hebrew scroll, typically, the letters or the characters are much more complex. And if you look there, here's an example of what you might see in looking at a Torah scroll. And you can see how much more complex these are. In fact, look at the shin, the way the top of that looks compared to the way it looks up here, where it's just all straight, completely sans serif. And so when you actually see the Torah scroll, make it a point to look at the characters on it, and you'll see that they look more like this. And of course, you'll see a variety of these when you're in Israel. I hope everybody is going there with me in November. If you haven't already made that decision, please make that decision. It's going to be wonderful. But the signs that you'll see in Israel have a variety of fonts on them, just as signs you see in the United States do. So this is pretty typical of a Torah scroll. There are differences depending upon whether it's Sephardic or Ashkenazi, that's Middle Eastern or Eastern European typically, and even within those there are some differences. And then this next alphabet is how Hebrew is written in script. And this is what you would call longhand in English, when you write it out like this as opposed to block print or printing in a book. And we're not going to learn this, but I just want to show you what it looks like. Because if you actually hand write a note to somebody, if you're in Israel or you're writing to somebody else who's fluent in Hebrew, you typically write it in script, not in block. Same as in English, most people write in script. I actually write in block when I write in English just because I like it better. But most people write in script, and so in Hebrew, this is what the script looks like. You can see that's Aleph, quite different from that Aleph. The Beit looks like that. Gimel. No resemblance. Gimel, Dalet, right? So it looks quite different. You get used to it and you learn it, but it's similar to script. If you look at script letters, you'll see many of them. Think about an R in script. Goes like that, as opposed to like that. So our script differs too. And then finally, I want to show you a script which is called Rashi. This is the last one on your page. This is another written script used by Rashi, who is the most famous biblical commentator among the Jews. And this is the script that he used when he wrote. And somebody who knows Hebrew well can look at notes by Rashi and pretty much read it, although they'll stumble sometimes on some of those letters.
What year was he alive?
Rashi, I will guess wrong if I guess. I'll look and let you know. So those are the alphabets, many hundreds of years ago, but that's as well as I'll do for right now. So if you turn to page 18, I've got sort of a review here of the alphabet so far. The red are the letters that we've already learned. The blue are some letters that we've seen in passing. We're going to learn those today. Green are some that we will learn soon. And then the purple are the sophites. They're the forms of the letters when they are at the end of a word. There's another thing I want to point out on this page, and that's the letter chet. I've got it written there as X-E-T, and I did that on purpose because this is a sound not in English. It's sort of in English in Bach, if you get that last little sound there, but it's set at the back of the throat, and it's a sound like that. And we just don't have a letter for that in English or really have that sound. And so to represent it in the English alphabet is done one of generally three ways, with a CH, a KH, or an X. And so if you see a pronunciation guide and it's got either CH, KH, or X, it's the sound like that, okay? And so chet is that letter right there. Now, let's press on a little bit. I want to show you something pretty interesting. Does that look familiar? El Al, that's the Israel airline, okay? And now if you look at your book, this is a really interesting discussion because everybody says, what does El Al mean? Well, everybody's not quite so sure, including the Israelis, nor even how it actually got that name. And I want to explain why, and this is one of those things about a nucleus of words in Hebrew. Because El, if you'll remember, can mean God. It can also mean to, like you're going to something, or you're going towards something in that general direction. And Al, remember the Spirit of God hovered over the wild and the waste, over creation? That over, that's the word al in Hebrew. So that can mean over or on or above, and it can also mean about. Okay, so now take el and al and figure out which combination of those possible definitions it means. Well, it's just as confusing for people in Israel because nobody really knows. It could mean God is over all. It could mean toward the above or upwards. And most people say it means upwards, but it's not clear. And in fact, there's actually been quite a lot of debate over the years about what the name of the airline actually means. And there's been some conversation that it has confused the grammar of the language because it's two prepositions in a row. Shouldn't the second one be a noun, preposition, and then a noun? So it's actually confused some of the discussions of grammar in Hebrew about Hebrew. Pretty interesting. The other thing that it says right beneath that, El Al Israel Airlines, is it says, Nativai Avia La Israel. Israel Airlines, but literally it means something more like highway air to Israel, or a path in the air to Israel. And if you think about the word airline, the word line there is actually about a path. A train line or a line of thought, it's about a path. And so airline means a line through the air to Israel. And that's the name of El Al, which we will be flying on when we all go to Israel together in November. All right. Turn the page if you would. Here's a Coca-Cola can. Now I actually own one, and I looked all over the place to find it so I could bring it in and show it to you, and I couldn't find it. But this is what a Coca-Cola can looks like in Israel. And if you turn it sideways, you can guess that it's Coca-Cola. And it's a very fancy script version of those letters, but you can see, actually, you can piece out what it says. And if you look in your book, you see I actually printed it out, so you can see it's Kaf, Vav, Kaf, Hey, and then Kaf, Vav, Lamed, Hey. That's how it's spelled in Hebrew, Coca-Cola. Not to leave out their competitor, there's Pepsi. Okay, and if you turn this sideways, you can see this is Fe or Pei, Samech Yod. Now we're just going to learn, we know Yod, but we're going to learn the Pei, Fei, and Samech today. If you remember, we talked about the Nikud, or the Nikudim. Those are the little dots that we put in front of letters to change their pronunciation. And if you remember, the one we started with was bait or bet right there. And it has a V sound normatively if there's no dot, but if you put a dot right there, then it's a B sound, ba rather than va. Well, a similar thing goes on with Fei and Pei, which is right there. Normally when it's by itself, it's an F sound, Fei. But if you put a Nikud right there, it becomes a Pei sound, okay? As in Pepsi. But if you look at the Pepsi can, there's no Nikud. You can see Pep-C, but there's no Nikud in there. And that's because most signage in Israel doesn't include the Nikudim. It's just the plain characters. And you understand it by context rather than because it's got the little markings. If you read the newspaper, many of the newspapers will have the Nikudim in them, but the big signs that you see outside typically don't. So, and then lastly, I mentioned on here on page 20, Boker Tov. In fact, Boker Tov. Boker Tov. Good morning. Tov is good, Boker is morning. So there are 5 important letters that we're going to learn here from these various things that we've looked at today. El-Al, the first is ayin. We said this in passing before. We had learned it in passing. I described it as a backwards Y. I looked at it, it's actually a regular Y. So I'm thinking in my brain, why do I think it's a backwards Y? And then I realized it's because I was thinking in Hebrew from right to left. And so it was backwards in my brain because my brain was going that way when it looked at it. Isn't that funny? Our brains are very unusual. Anyway, that's ayin, one of my favorite letters. And it's the A sound, as is aleph. So there are 2 characters in Hebrew that have the A sound, and this is the second one, ayin.
Is that like if you think about it, the aleph and the aleph is more of a short A and...
The question is the aleph and the A, and the aleph is more of a short A. No, actually, the aleph is silent. It's a silent character which is put in certain places in words to tell you how to pronounce it there, but it doesn't have its own sound. It'll have Nikudim below it, either a line or a dot or a couple of dots, and that tells you how it's pronounced right there. But the aleph itself is silent. It's a silent letter. The ayin is an A sound. Ayin, okay? That's as in el-al, and it means with the lamed, ayin lamed means over. So that's a preposition that we know. Next one is kaf, as in Coca-Cola. This is another one of my favorite characters, and I can't tell you how to remember it. There's something about my hand when I write this in script or in block that I enjoy because it's a hook like this and then a downward line. But that's a sound, kaf, as in, it's not, it's ka, as in Coca-Cola and Boker Tov. And if you look back on the bottom of page 20 at the Hebrew, you can see the Boker there, the bet has a Nikud in it, so you know it's a B sound, Boker, and then there's the resh at the end, Boker Tov. We'll get to the Tov in just a moment, okay? And then the next letter that we want to look at, and you'll see that in Kola, is called Vav. Now this is probably the most useful letter in Hebrew because it's sort of a chameleon letter and it has several different functions. When Vav appears at the beginning of a word, it usually means and. So if someone said, how are you? And I said, fine, and then I said, and you, and it was a man, I'd say, vata. Ata is you, masculine. So I'd say, vata, and you. So very often you'll see a word that begins with vav. You'll see this in Scripture all the time. And when the word begins with vav, almost always it means and, A-N-D, just that word and. That's one way vav is used. Another way is it appears in the middle of a word to tell you whether you should say oo or o. So if you had beit vav, it would, if the vav had a nikud right there, it would be an oo sound. It would be boo. And if the nikud was up there, it would be bo. So down here, oo, up there, o. And so this letter, vav, is used in words to tell you if the sound you're to be making is an oo sound or an o sound, depending upon where the nikud is placed.
What's a silent letter in that passage?
It's an interesting question. Its natural sound is va, but when it's producing an oo or an o, it doesn't have the va sound. It's just the oo or the o. At the beginning of a word, such as in vata, it's the va sound, meaning ah. Sometimes, depending upon the word that it's saying and about, that's pronounced, oddly enough, oo. So I could say uata, and people would understand that I meant and you, but uata is harder to say than vata. So it's a V sound there. There are some other words that it might be the and for, where it's an oo sound because it's easier to say it with an oo sound. Okay. Samik. This is an extraordinary letter. This is as in Pepsi Cola. Remember we said Pepsi Cola. So that letter right there, that round letter, is Samik. And it has an S sound. It's not shin or sin, it's always S sound like that, as in Pepsi Cola. And there are several different ways this is written. There are always circles. Sometimes it's just a plain circle. Actually, it always ends this way. Other times it looks a little bit more like this. If you look at the chart of different alphabets that I showed you back on page 17, you'll see Samik is written in a variety of ways. This is an interesting word because the root of Samik means to lean upon, to uphold, or support. So it in itself is a very supportive character. Sometimes that same circle in Samik is also meant to represent the all-enfolding goodness of God, and also the spiraling motion of God lifting you into his presence. It's that same letter. Samik actually would go this way.
So it doesn't always have the tag at the end?
Usually has the tag at the end. Sometimes it's pretty little when you look at it. It's also the root of semicha, which is the laying on of hands for like a sheep that was about to be sacrificed, or a priest when he was being consecrated. And the numerical value, I'm not going to go into this in detail because it gets really complicated and it's not really on point for us. But the numerical value of Samik is 60, which is related to the Birchat Kohanim, the priestly blessing you can find in Numbers 23 through 27. And do you remember in Star Trek, Mr. Spock, excuse me, what did he say? Live long and prosper. Where Leonard Nimoy got that, Leonard Nimoy is Jewish, where Leonard Nimoy got that is from the Birkat Kohanim, from the priestly blessing. When a person who is a Kohen, a Jewish Kohen, says a blessing in a worship service, they hold their hands like this. And then they say in Hebrew, I'll just say the first part of it, Yevarechecha Hashem ve'yushmarecha. Notice the Hashem in there is that word Yod-He, Vav-He, which I showed you. And they hold their hands like this. And very often, if you look at the gravestone of a Kohen, a person who was a priest, it'll actually have hands carved into it that look like this. That's how they hold their hands when they say that priestly blessing from Numbers 6, 23 through 27. Then the final character I want to show you today is Tet. And this is as in the Tov of good. Boker Tov, the T-O-V, that T sound is this, Tet. Okay? So these are our letters for today. Now, turn, if you would, to the top of page 22. And what you'll see there is a photograph of a section of a Torah scroll from Genesis, the first couple of chapters of Genesis. Here's a photograph of it. You're going to look at it up close in just a minute. But I want you to look at an enlarged photograph of it for a moment. And what I've done is I put some numbers on the page, on page 22, so you can see where the verses begin. And on page 23, I've broken the verses out as you would see them in a printed Torah book. If you had a book of the Torah and the verses in Genesis 1 through 5 were printed out, that's what they would look like printed out. The English is below, numbered 1 through 5. And if you look at the Torah scroll, you can see where I've floated the numbers on top of the verses where they start. And in fact, if you go on the website, after we post this week's lesson, there will be a sound file there of the first 5 verses of Genesis being read in Hebrew. So you'll be able to actually follow the Hebrew on it. You know enough of those letters now that you ought to be able to take your finger and follow it as it is read in Hebrew. And then the English is there below it. And this is from the Jewish Publication Society text from 1917. Okay, now what I would like you all to do, I have one other thing to show you that I missed back there. A couple more. That one I'll skip. In a Jewish synagogue, the Torah scroll is kept. This is up near the front of a Jewish synagogue where the cross is here in our church, and back is a very large cabinet. You can see there's a Star of David on top of it. This cabinet is called the Ark. And inside the Ark is a scroll. It's rolled up on 2, I don't know what you'd call them. Spindles, thank you. Rolled up on 2 spindles. And in order to get to the place where you're going to read, you roll up on one and unroll from the other. And it's laid down on top of a table, very much like this one, with the spindles on either side. Now, I don't own an entire Torah scroll. I own a portion of Genesis, both from the beginning of it and from Genesis 22. This is also what it would look like if it was being held up. You can see the spindles here, and it's unrolled, just rolled up a little bit there. So this is probably Genesis right there, Bereshit, as it's being held up. Okay. I also brought an El Al airplane. They gave that to me. All right, let me clear off the top here and then invite you to come up and look at Genesis. Now, this is a yod. You can look at it when you come up. It looks like a hand. And when a Torah scroll is read, you don't touch it because it would get filthy and wear out quickly. This particular scroll, I believe, is about 300 years old. They last hundreds of years because of the preparation of the parchment, which is actually an animal hide, and the preparation of the ink so that it lasts a very, very long time. If you look really close, you'll see some of the ink on this is flaking off, and this is actually a section that was replaced. So there was a big Torah scroll. This portion of it was considered too damaged to stay on the roll, and it was taken out. It was completely rewritten by a scribe, and then it was sewn on to the scroll that it came off of and rolled back up again. So this was the damaged portion which was removed. And this is the yod, which is used as a pointer when it's read like that. We also use this when we're leading worship here, and the person standing right here is pointing so the priest knows where to read next. In case they're looking out here, they don't lose their place, so we keep them. So come on up and take a look at it.
Where would you start at on this page?
Right here. There's Bereshit, Bara Elohim. At the beginning, created God. Yeah, it still has a lot of curl in it because it's been rolled up for hundreds of years.
I knew someone who worked for us.
Let me just answer a couple of questions about Torah scrolls. They have, as far as I know, always been on animal hides, and they're specially prepared. There's a very complex process to prepare that hide, and including wasps. I don't even know how, flour and wasps, I don't understand it, to prepare the hide, and then the ink is also very carefully prepared. It typically takes about a year and a half for a scribe, a sofer, to do an entire Torah scroll. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those 5 books takes about a year and a half. And for a congregation to buy one, which was a time of great celebration, both raising the money and then getting it after it's been completed, a new Torah scroll is typically about $10,000. So it's not cheap.
I think I noticed online the first letter in script, it was like a C with a line behind it, and what you
The
showed
aleph.
was a C the other way. I just wonder if I was wrong, maybe in looking.
It's in script for aleph, it's like this and this. So it's a backwards C plus a line to its left. That's
And
an
then I
aleph.
wanted for a secondary question, how much latitude is there in the way in which they write it? Meaning, all of us have a different handwriting.
Lots of latitude. Yeah, lots. It's just like any other language. There's lots of latitude in the way it's written.
Some people can't
Yeah.
read other people's handwriting.
Yeah, I'm sure doctors in Israel have their own unique version of Hebrew script. Yeah, just like here. Oh, let's see, I was going to show you one more.
But is that true for the scriptures when they write one of these? Isn't it a very particular?
Yes, it is, and it's not in script. In fact, if you look in your book on the first page for the lesson today, 17, the third script down is typical of a Torah script. Okay, this is what I didn't show you earlier, but I'll show you now. This is a little logo that a Jewish congregation made for themselves as they were preparing to get a new Torah scroll. And they had a trip to Israel tied into it. So who can tell me what it says in Hebrew there? Our journey from what to what? Okay, I'll tell you. It says our journey from Bereshit to Israel. From Genesis to Israel. Bereshit to Israel. Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, I noticed that one of the letters has 2 forms in one script and not another. On page 4, which is up there too. I think it's tet or tat.
Oh, that's I don't know the answer to that question. I wondered the same thing myself, whether it has a Sophite form of kaf. And my guess would be that kaf with the nikud never appears at the end of a word. I don't know that, but that would be my guess. All right, thank you all. See you next week.